The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. Everything you think you know about evil is wrong. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Monday, the 15th of April, 9:12 p.m., and I'm going to do another short addition to the ongoing podcast series on the devil, which is from a chapter in the book I published on December 5th called The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. And if you haven't bought it yet, then you can do that. It's on Amazon. It's just in paperback now. I suppose I'll get an EPUB out at some time. If you can't afford the book, just send me an email at seenthattinker@gmail.com, seenthattinker@gmail.com, and I'll send you a free PDF, okay? And I'd love for people to read this book, although quite a number of people have read it or bought it since December 5th, so it's doing quite well. But nothing comes close to Stardust Ranch. People just love that UFO stuff. Between um, audiobook and EPUB and hardcover and paperback, I've sold about 7,000 copies of that book. It's kind of become something of a cult phenomenon. But we're talking about The Devil in Us, which is a much more personal story for me and talks a little bit about writing those books, which was really quite something in and of itself. So in our last section on the devil, we were talking about the imagination. Now, the imagination is really important. You have to understand the role of the imagination in consciousness, okay? The imagination is not what they're telling you it is. It's, not what we talk about it as in our popular society. The imagination is a mystical gateway, okay? I suppose the difference is whether you're just looking at your own creations in your forehead or whether your third eye is opened and you can actually see reality in your forehead. You can see other dimensions and you can see different aspects of time in this dimension, which you can also do when your consciousness goes above this dimension. So, as I said yesterday, we'll begin where we left off. Evolutionary psychologists would have us believe that the imagination evolved for higher adaptation. I suppose that's true. I mean, human beings don't have very many natural defense skills against the creatures in nature. I mean, there's not much we could win a fight with in nature barehanded. I think a raccoon would scare most people if all you had to fight it was your hands. And then things just get bigger from there, So our defense mechanism is our ability to conceptualize and manifest, which is also part of the spiritual nature of the human consciousness. Even at its basest level of expression, which is just sense and mind, we can still imagine and we can still manifest. So our ability to envisage alternative scenarios and future outcomes allowed us a significant advantage in survival and adaptation. Okay, we've been over all this. Okay, so now these very same evolutionary psychologists would have us believe that our narrative myths were the product of imagination for the formation of culture, and just a means of sharing beliefs, creating community, facilitating communication, and passing knowledge generationally. This is incorrect. All of the pantheons that are documented in the human experience were actually real. Okay? The Roman gods were real. The Greek gods were real. The Scandinavian gods of Siberian and Arctic shamanism were real. The Tuatha De Danann of my Celtic ancestry were real. And it's not just that they were real, they are real. They're still here, they're still in the spectrum of human experience, and they're still working with the various races that they seeded on this planet. And this is the truth of how races get seeded on the planet. So the spirit can come from very many different places and just enter into a human body for the human experience. But the thing is, when you come into this planet, something happens. It's very difficult to get off of this planet. Once you incarnate in it, you end up in a kind of hamster wheel, if you will. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is discussed in other chapters of the book. We're dealing with the devil now. Now, I want to take a slightly different approach in examining the imagination. So I'm going to ask you to try to remember sexual stimulation in your body. What happens? Where does it begin? How does it come about? Usually it's stimulated. In the human being, arousal usually occurs visually. Although throughout history, there have been many forms of sexual stimulation. We wouldn't want to marginalize the French with their perfume. So the olfactory sense is a part of sexual stimulation. French very adeptly. That's a very base, almost animalistic sexual stimulation, because animals breed generally by pheromones, by smell, right? So we're mimicking animal behavior when we wear perfume. We're actually trying to sexually stimulate males or females around us, depending on what our orientation is. Okay? So we can say that the olfactory sense is a sexual stimulant as well. The largest stimulant of human sexuality is sight. Okay, visualization, or just your eyes. We're very visual, and this is what separates us from the animals. A cat won't have a particular type of cat it wants to mate with. I have 8 cats now. I used to have 21, but people come and get cats off me now because I'm known as a cat guy. So if any of the farmers around me need a cat, they come and ask for a cat. In fact, I'm giving a kitten away tomorrow. So I'm down to about 7 cats now. But there's no preference in their mating. There's no preference in the mating of bears. Now, there are certain animals that do mate for life. I believe pigeons mate for life, which is a very odd thing. I find it odd anyways. But generally, what I'm getting at here is there's not a lot of visual stimulation. Okay, one cat is as good as another for a male cat, one female cat. But in human beings, there's a visual quality to our attraction, right? Very, very visual. And this has been really something that has been used to just completely manipulate consciousness in the 20th century. And in the 21st century, it's just completely out of control. I mean, when you compare our society to a more sexually conservative society like a Muslim society, I mean, we're practically living in a brothel at this point, right? We're a normal street now in Toronto or New York has women walking down it who would only dress that way 100 years ago or 75 years ago if they worked in the red light district of a legal brothel zone of a city. And I'm not trying to be chauvinistic or be a caveman here or anything like that. Stay with me, listen to my thesis, okay? Because it's not about gender at this point, okay? Advertising agents certainly understand this, okay? And by associating any number of products with sexual stimulation, they correlate sexual impulse and purchasing. This is really a manipulation of human consciousness. It shouldn't be allowed. It should be illegal. And quite frankly, given that psychology comes from the medical field, it's a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. It's an abuse of our psyches, right? And if you were to make a physical analogy, it would be like doing an appendectomy on somebody who doesn't need one, unnecessary surgery, right? And that doctor would go to jail. But it's amazing how much of what we learned about the psyche has been incorporated into the capital model and the manipulation of our minds. And this is even worse now with social media and all of the things that we're dealing with, right? So in any sane society, it would be psychological abuse, which would be medical malpractice for the reason I gave. So our wonderfully imbalanced Western society, this is just business as usual for us. Sure. There were cries of outrage along the way, There were fear mongers at the side of the road holding up their signs every decade since the flappers in the 1920s, saying the world was coming to an end. No, whores have always been around. Prostitution was probably the first real human industry. They go right through the formation of the United States. Every town had a whorehouse. It was actually legal for quite a while. It was made illegal in 1910 with the White Slave Traffic Act. It wasn't until the 1980s that the formal academic study of prostitution in the United States commenced, and it was probably a result of the AIDS disease in the gay community. The study began because there were concerns about women being forced into prostitution, sexually transmitted diseases, sex trafficking, and sexualized violence. As well, it came to be understood, although it's hard to believe it was never really misunderstood, that there was a connection between substance abuse, drug addiction, alcoholism, mental health, and sex work. You think? It's not so much that prostitution was made illegal in 1910, rather it was just that moving women from one state to another for the purpose of prostitution was illegal. Now, it was pretty easy to laugh off the people who advocated for sexual restraint in society. I was born in 1966. I grew up in the 70s and early 80s. So I was, 13 years old in 1979 and then 20 years old by 1986. And so those are really the years that you call your coming of age years. Sexuality was fairly open back then. I mean, but nothing like we have today. I mean, I can only imagine what this pornography is doing to young minds. And it's so unbelievably, how I don't want to say, it's impossible to film two people making love and generate interest. Okay. There's a black and white film of John Lennon and Yoko Ono making love nude. I think it was filmed in a Montreal hotel room. You'll turn it off after 30 seconds. It's completely boring, from the pornography perspective. And you have this incredible sense that you're violating people's privacy because it's just incredibly tender, right? And it's very loving. It's literal the opposite of pornography. So we used to, but the people who've been saying that this is bad, I mean, I laughed at them in the 80s and 90s, the moral majority, Pat Buchanan and all those, Christian morons. At that time, I thought, well, they're just sexually repressed, standard Jewish response, right? And this is another thing too, is that this is tacit Jewish influence in the West, okay? And you do your own due diligence on this. You'll find almost behind every pornography magazine that began after Playboy, Hugh Hefner was Jewish. They're all Jewish pretty much, and the owner of Pornhub now, or the parent company, I forget what it's called, Mind something, is actually a rabbi. Okay. So why all this sex is being pushed into society? Well, it's something you do when you want to distract people, and it's representative of the end of a society. When you see these breeding patterns, you see them in Constantinople just before the end of Constantinople. They all do the same thing, these regional empires that become very powerful. They all start bringing in beautiful women from every corner of the world, and sex becomes commodified, and the family becomes an afterthought. And we're in like the stage 10 of this, of a 10-stage process in the West now. So I don't know what to say about this. I really don't. I really don't. We have a whole new language for different types of sexual orientation now. The one that sort of, I guess, gets the most press is incel, which is an involuntary celibate. It's a male. And, some guy living in his parents' basement who can't get laid. And, they're mocked and they're laughed at, in our society, an incel. So we had these people all along, and we laughed at them. We called them nut jobs, fanatics, religious zealots, and they've been the fodder of the left and the liberal media for decades. Just think of Bill Maher. Bill Maher he hosts a show on HBO called Real Time with Bill Maher. Sexual libertarian and never married. He's in his late 60s now. Still does a lot of sex jokes. I don't think he's quite realized that they're kind of creepy when they're coming from your grandpa, but you can't get through to Bill Maher. From my understanding, he was literally a fixture in the Playboy Mansion all through the 80s and 90s, and a bit of a whoremonger. And it seeps into his politics, right? And he's a classic example. Recently, a series came out called The Secrets of Playboy, and it is not the picture that you thought it was. I mean, Hugh Hefner was, I'd say, certifiable. He should have been in jail. He was into bestiality. He was having, putting his penis into dogs. This was witnessed by his girlfriends, walking in on him. And this is a man who just literally saturated himself with the most beautiful women in the world. And, most men would die to have a beautiful woman, love them and be their wife and bear them children. And this guy's just using them as part of a commodity called Playboy magazine and having sex with quite a few of them, and basically indirectly pimping them out to his movie star friends. I mean, it was just, the Playboy Mansion was a high-end brothel and probably an early version of an Epstein operation where they compromised people. This is another thing they do with sex, is they compromise a lot of people, and it gets political. They get the political support of the people, whether they're an elected politician or just a powerful public voice. Once you're in that machine, the entertainment complex, and which is definitely, I think, an aspect of the shadow government or the satanic cult that's running the world. The anti-life cult, we'll call it, because they love killing things ritually and otherwise. They're definitely a part of this explosion of sexual, I hesitate to use the word perversion, but, well, explosion of sexuality and focus on sexuality in our society. One of the reasons that Arabic society advanced scientifically before the West, it's very popular now to make Arabs look really stupid and backwards, and we do that by focusing in our news stories on backward places like remote parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And those, you talk to any Muslim and they'll tell you, I mean, those are the most backward parts of the Muslim world. But our Western media wants us to believe that Muslims are all like that, and they're not. Very extraordinary culture, the Islamic culture, and it deserves respect. It doesn't deserve our condemnation. They advanced scientifically and mathematically, and in the Middle Ages, there was a bit of a renaissance in the Islamic world. They advanced mathematics quite a bit, trigonometry, I believe. They invented the lens so that we could have telescopes and eyeglasses and things like this. And some people think that one of the reasons they advanced in this way was their art was very geometric, the weaving of the rugs and stuff like this, and all of their design was very much about shape and geometry in their art, and it led to a very mathematical mind. And the reason they went this way is under Islamic law, it was unlawful to paint the female nude. And in the Western societies and in the Renaissance, the female nude was something that was being painted all the time. And so I guess it's where you put your attention, right? So the thing about these people with telling us that we were on our way to Sodom and Gomorrah and we laughed at them, including me, it isn't so funny anymore now as you look at the world, is it? It's almost like open warfare now. What changed? Nothing. The people at the side of the road, the zealots, they were right all along. Okay. It was just a slow multi-generational burn. And that's what's so hard to pin down about a lot of these movements. It's if a certain behavior is exacerbated by youth, then when a line is crossed by one generation, and I would say it was the baby boomers that crossed the line, every generation after it is going to go a little bit further, like a military unit taking the white flag further into the no man's land, a term from World War I. Not really knowing where they're going or what the goal is, but they keep doing it. And we're at where we're at now, which is just, I would say, complete and total sexual and gender dysphoria in the West now. And with the full support of academia and the media and liberal governments, even though a lot of the people who transitioned early are speaking out now and saying, look, this was a huge mistake. And a lot of them are reverse transitioning, but a lot of the surgery can't be reversed. Okay. So it's not so funny anymore. Aside from being invisible to the human eyes, the things which live in darkness also work at a pace at which seeing them operate is impossible, or seeing their effects in one generation is difficult. It's more of a cumulative effect. But when it arrives, we cannot believe what we've co-created with the things which live in darkness. Okay? Sex in the advertising industry started slow and got racier and racier every decade. In the early 70s, the pornography industry began in the United States. Linda Lovelace was one of the first stars. That's her stage name, of course. She starred in a movie called Deep Throat. I'll let you figure out what it's about. The 70s were all about enjoying ourselves. The puritanical decades that preceded us and the tight wound nature of our grandparents and great-grandparents just wasn't going to wash anymore in the age of television, rock music, and recreational narcotics like cannabis, cocaine, and LSD. Now, pornography has always been associated with the liberation of women among the people who profit from it. You can't make this stuff up. I dare you to even try. In fact, they don't like the word pornography. They prefer to call it eroticism. It takes the physical act of lovemaking and reduces it to two dimensions on a moving picture screen. Nothing has had more effect on culture and society in the last several generations. Now, remember, my general thesis in this section of the chapter is on the devil is imagination, okay? Now, the imagination is a gateway to the mind, okay? Now, if you've ever done any extensive studying on exorcism, getting bad spirits out of people, the Catholics call them demons. I don't believe those demons exist as they name them. I think that's just a bunch of nonsense, but that's just my opinion. But let me be clear, there are entities as negative as the Catholic Church is describing. It's just that at the top, it's more of a cooperative relationship. Okay, they're working together. So you need to understand the reality you're living through is two-dimensional. So the physical world is controlled from the astral world. Okay? And so a lot of the big institutions that sway imagination and capture the human imagination on this planet are working from a plane of existence above the physical. And very often they have confederacy there. And as I've said already in this series on the devil, there are 1,000,001 more things in creation than are described in all of our scriptures. There are so many races of intelligent life out there and on this planet that it's almost undocumentable, just due to the number of them, okay? Certain schools of spirituality and shamanic tradition deal with certain classes of these beings, You know, some people in the shamanic traditions work with what are called elemental beings, which are conscious beings, and they can be fire elementals, water elementals, and they exist. Here in Costa Rica, up in the mountains, we have a race of beings that are known as the Duende, and the Duende means goblin in English. But they're more like the dwarves in Snow White, kind of like that, which should tell you something about Disney. But those who have had encounters with the Duende will get quite cross with you, quite angry with you if you mock them. And they've really had these encounters. And the Duende really do exist. I have not communicated with them, but I know people who have. So the traffickers always found a way to make this seem consensual. There's my cat going up there, one of my 8 cats. According to Linda Lovelace, it wasn't consensual, okay? And I've already shattered the myth of Playboy, okay? And Hugh Hefner was just a complete degenerate, okay? Absolute psychotic degenerate. And a lot of people who have too much sex get this way too. You know, you just look at that nonsense with, you know, Jack Nicholson and Dennis Hopper and Roman Polanski and the 15-year-old girl. And, you know, Quentin Tarantino defends that. He's actually defended that in podcasts. And there's a whole group of people defending sex with children now. It's becoming more, and this is the frontier they want, okay? Because this negative tendency, this self-destructive tendency that we have, which is governed by the devil as an energy source or as a ribbon of consciousness or a frequency of consciousness, it is real. And it does have profoundly destructive capabilities, okay? So when you see a society behaving this way, that's a society that is beginning to enter into the throes of death. Okay, it's overt sexuality, barbaric sexuality, compulsive sexuality is a component of the death wish. The literal and diametric opposite of what sex was intended to do by our creator and by nature, which is to produce more life. You see how that dichotomy works? Very often, if you use the duality given to us in Taoism, you'll be able to analyze a lot of things and see what's going on, okay? And so overt sexuality like this is a manifestation of death wish, okay? And it certainly comes through in the abortions that are going on now. Now I'm pro-choice. I'm not necessarily pro-life. I would not want to be party to an abortion. I would not want to be with a woman. I would not want to impregnate a woman and have her want to kill the child. I would not wish it personally upon me. But my spiritual perspective is free will. And we live fundamentally in what I would call a hologram. So if you want the lesson of murdering a child inside you, then do that. See how it makes you feel, see what you dream, and so on and so forth. Okay. So here's what Linda Lovelace said in 1986. When you see the movie Deep Throat, you're watching me being raped. It is a crime that the movie is still showing. There was a gun to my head the entire time. Okay, now whether that's true or not, or who can say? You know, do we live in a world where we can trust women? I think there were as many abuses of the Me Too movement and the rights given to women in the 70s. And certainly any man who's been through family court has felt them. There's been as many abuses as there have been rectifications of injustices. Okay, so it's sad to say, but we can't even take women at their word anymore. I find it dubious that Linda Lovelace says that this was done at gunpoint. You know, I mean, all she had to do was pick up the phone and call the police and say, I'm here against my will. Okay, so maybe there was some coercion. Maybe there were some things she didn't want to do. I don't know. I don't know. But I don't think any woman other than a high-end madam, okay, like a Heidi Fleiss type who's making millions of dollars in Los Angeles and Hollywood, who would willingly go into prostitution as a trade. Okay, it's always an act of desperation. Okay, always a sort of act of desperation or a form of payment of debt if you're brought somewhere by smugglers. This goes on all the time now as well. Um, so there's that. Um, so there's a curious thing needs to be pointed out here. In my opinion, it's no coincidence that pornography originated in the society with the greatest middle class in the history of civilizations. That's not to say that America in the 70s invented decadence. Every society that achieved any measure of opulence perfected decadence. The Ottomans mastered it. The Romans absolutely mastered it. The Greeks were no strangers to it. It's just that it had never been spread across such a large swath of people before. And that was because there had never been a middle class before. There had never been hundreds of millions of people in a single society with the disposable income and the leisure time to indulge desires that had been left dormant due to the intensity of surviving and raising a family in the past. It was like we all became Roman senators. Power is the greatest desire of men because from power, all other desires can be met, achieved. But from humility, they all must be earned. It's the oldest contract in the world. Power is an illusion of epic proportions. It's the moving carrot the human mule follows. But the utter simplicity can't be ignored. I get more money, I feel better. Wake up the next day and follow the carrot all day. It's probably the most common prayer in the world. Follow the carrot. A prayer is a complete atonement. People like the simplicity of it. Follow the carrot. What happens when you get the carrot? Nobody ever gets the carrot. You were yoked and pumping a well all day. That's how we get the water to the castle. Ultimate power is the ultimate illusion, a bottomless black pit. And the self that asked for that power is the first thing consumed by it. The Faustian bargain revealed all the devil does is open doors. You have to walk through, and you have to do that of your own free will. The devil does not violate the law. Okay? The devil does not violate the law. Therefore, the devil is not the enemy of man. It was a tool created to sell fear to you, to create one of the top 5 wealthiest institutions in the world. I'm not sure what they are now, but about 10 years ago, I saw a list of the top 5 wealthiest institutions in the world. Only 2 were corporations. One was the Catholic Church, one was the Mormons. And I was surprised to find out that the Mormons are a corporation, okay? The Mormons own hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, okay? They've taken over things like the citrus industry in Florida. Why is a church so invested in all of these things? Well, you know, all of these new religions created by Masons, and Masonry is really Judaica. All of Western secret societies come from the Kabbalah, okay? Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, the Martinists, all of them, and they all pivot around ceremonial magic, which is not a true worship of God and is actually rebuked in scriptures, in the true scriptures, okay? But again, it's a free will space and you're allowed to play with these things. You know how many friends I have? Well, it's not like hundreds, but I have at least a half dozen friends who got as deep into black magic as a human being could get. I mean, these people could kill you from 3,000 kilometers away. I myself have been attacked by black magic. I documented that in a blog post I did on my Substack. Black magic is real. Okay, it's a form of military offensive. Okay. So I'm just going to keep these podcasts short now. I don't want to bore people. They're very dense. There's a lot of information in them. I'm coming off of the book. If you want to have a greater participation in these podcasts, you would be best to get a copy of the book, The Devil in Us, A Memoir of You and Me, which is up on Amazon right now. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review.
Stardust Ranch, the incredible true story. One of the most bizarre paranormal stories in American history.